Welcome back to Transforming Moments. We're in episode 5 now, and it's just been really fun. My name is Jaden, and this is my co-host, Jim. And really, the whole reason we started this is because we wanted to talk about these stories of where we've seen God transform people. And it just came from this thing that we actually did as a staff once a month together, is we would all go around the table and take turns and just say, where have you seen God at work in someone in your life? And sometimes it was even, how have you seen God at work in your own life? And every time we did that, we just left feeling better, because it makes our eyes more open to the things that God was doing all around us. And whenever we actually started looking for those things, you start realizing, oh, God's always doing something, and he's always working in someone, and there's always something to be seen around you. And so we walked around with more awareness and more expectancy of God doing his thing, and us being able to see how powerful he is, how good he is. And in the middle of our own lives, when it felt hard to see God, once you hear all those stories, you go, oh, he's still good. Absolutely. And he's still faithful, and he's always going to be. And so that's the hope of this podcast, is we want everyone to be able to hear those stories and be able to see the way that God is working in this church in so many people's lives. And it's been really fun for me, because now we've had 4 episodes where we've gotten to hear these different stories, and every single episode has been so different. Like, we've gotten to see how God has transformed people through experiences like church camp and retreats, and how just giving God your attention can transform you. But then we've also talked about how God can transform us through grief and suffering and really hard things too. And then just this last one, we talked about how God can transform even the beliefs you grew up with, and even how he uses unity. And when we choose to keep that unity that God has given us with our brothers and sisters, how that transforms us. And so I'm super excited about today, because we have someone really special here that's going to talk about something else that can help transform us.
Someone special is an understatement.
I know. I'm very excited.
So some may be watching this and say, oh, it's another family update, because Mark McQueen is here. Mark McQueen is our guest today. He's one of our elders here at GCR. And he is also, though, today we're going to be talking a little bit about the role of counseling in our transformation. And Mark is the clinical director of Center's Counseling Center here in Midland, and we're thrilled that he's here. We've asked him to come to talk about this subject because, when you think about transformation, I kind of grew up with the idea that spiritual transformation, did not include counseling or therapy. In other words, there's just something about if God does it to me, and I don't really need any other help. And I think that is it's a very short-sighted way of viewing things, and especially when you think of a lot of the opportunities that are available. And someone like Mark can really help us. Hopefully, he'll be able to help us.
I will
today.
try.
You will try. I'm sure you will.
I have no doubt.
And so, Mark, you are our guest today. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And so, I thought it might be a good idea to start with, how did you get into the field of therapy and counseling? Like, when you were 12 years old, were you sitting, in 6th grade and going, one of these days I'm going to bust out of here and I'm going to be a marriage and family therapist?
So, no, that is not what I was thinking at age 12. Yeah. I don't know, beyond the counselor in my school who managed my schedule, I don't know that I even knew therapy was a thing at age 12. I can tell you at age 12, I had my eyes set on being on the PGA Tour, and I'm sure that's
you were close.
I was so close. If you've played golf with me, you know that is not accurate. But that at age 12, I had big dreams about that. Yeah. But that switched for me. What I knew when I got to college and young adult years, I knew I had some sense that I had gifting and interest in working with kids. I had a brief, interestingly enough, Jaden had a brief phase where I was like, well, I think I want to be a youth minister. I could see me doing that. And grew up in a church that didn't have a youth minister, and just thought how that would have enriched my experience. And as I went along, I love church, but I decided I'm not sure that's the place I want to work. So I envisioned myself doing counseling with kids in a school setting. Now that has morphed into some other things, but the thought of actually doing therapy with people didn't start till till college range, and really anticipated that it would be with kids. I guess when I was 19 years old, I didn't envision myself being a marriage therapist.
Right.
There was probably not much reason to do that, but I've ended up doing a whole lot of marriage counseling as well.
Right. Well, we are thrilled that you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, very cool.
Absolutely.
Well, I am interested in, I think one reason what us doing this podcast and this time can be really good for people is because we're around this holiday season and Christmas is coming up. We just passed Thanksgiving. And I think Christmas is really fun and it's exciting and it has all this stuff. But on the other end of it, I think the holidays can also be a season where people are going through a lot of different things, that are going through some harder emotions and having to deal with things like grief and disappointment and things like that. Is that something you see in your field?
Without question. I mean, you see an increase in people wanting to come in and talk or scheduling appointments, or you hear from people that haven't been in a while. But it's really based on a couple of things, and you touched on it, the holidays and any kind of anniversary date or birth date highlight things that are hard, whether it's a loss or a relationship that's not in the place you want it to be. There's something about the holidays that tend to highlight that. What I think is pretty true about human nature, no matter whether you're introverted or extroverted, people don't want to be lonely.
Yeah.
And loneliness tends to get highlighted for people at the holidays. The other thing you end up talking about a lot, it is so difficult to alter our expectations we have for key people in our life.
Yeah.
I maybe you have conflict with your parents and it is so hard, or a sibling or an aunt or an uncle, and you go into that holiday just hoping it's going to be different than if I just tweak it just a little bit, or don't talk about that one thing, or engage with them in this one way, this year will be better. And you find people are perpetually disappointed.
Yeah.
And which is what you've probably end up talking about more than anything. Encouraging people to shift the expectations they have of people that should be really important and are really important in their life.
Well, that was helpful right there.
Yeah, seriously. I think just anybody listening to that.
I was going to say that.
Good to feel like you're not alone in those
and
kind of feelings.
It's very informative as far as why this time of the year can be that way. And it kind of leads into my next thought was, and we talked about this a little bit before, but maybe it was a little bit before the pandemic. But really, in the past 10 years or so, there's been a lot more attention given to mental health, probably for a number of reasons. I should say attention given to, especially on social media, and just with all of the different ways we can get our information. And so mental health and counseling and therapy is not so much taboo anymore. Before, it was kind of like, more people were more reluctant. But now with this kind of, I don't want to say, well, I guess I can say glut of information about mental health. I mean, I can think in the past 3 or 4 months, I've listened to several podcasts where people were talking about mental health, burnout, and different aspects. And so it's been helpful for me, but we wonder for you in the field, what are the pros and cons of a public that is becoming more interested in mental health?
That's good.
Sure, and I'll talk about the pros first, because the pros are good, and you're right. They're even a little bit before COVID. Just national statistics were shifting a little bit. There were more people willing to go to therapy, and people that were going to see a counselor were much more open about it. There's much less stigma attached to it, and you see that really true in people, probably age 35 to 40 and below. We were talking a little bit before we started filming that there's a real trend with young people, with young adults. They have a therapist just because they just think they treat it like an oil change. They want to keep the engine running well, and so they just think it's a good thing to have in place, whether I have anything super serious to talk about or not. Once a quarter, I'm just going in and touching base with somebody who's a little bit of a third party with a little bit of different of expertise of questions to ask. So that part's really good. There's much less embarrassment about it. If you talk to my wife, she will tell you very regularly people will come up to her at a restaurant or at church and just start talking to her about things that might have happened in my office professionally. She obviously doesn't know about those things. We don't chat.
Right.
But what you love about that is there's not embarrassment attached to
the
that.
Shame
It's
is kind of
just
taken away.
the shame of that is gone. And so I think we're smarter about it. Research has gotten better. We're smarter about treatments. Right. Treatments have become more specialized. So just on the professional, clinical, and research end, that tends to happen in any field. We tend to get a little bit better at fields as we go along. On maybe the con side, and yes, mostly I don't want to be the grumpy old man talking about how bad social media is. I never want to be that guy because I think there's a lot of benefits from it. But there's a familiarity with mental health language, and you regularly hear people talking about. I'm going to use these as examples. Their anxiety, or their panic attack, or we'll refer to our friend as bipolar because they're a little bit moody and a little bit inconsistent. And just for the record, not every moody friend is bipolar,
right?
And you hear conversations. If a man's a little bit of a jerk sometimes or not super sensitive, we are really quick to call him a narcissist,
right?
And not every insensitive man is a narcissist. That's just not how that works. And but it ties into a much more important thing. There's this trend that is happening in my office. For example, someone will come in and start telling me about their panic attack, these panic attacks they have. And as I'm listening to it, it diagnostically does not meet the criteria for a panic attack.
Right.
And I feel like I'm sharing good news with them. You do not have a diagnosis. This is a hard situation, but you do not have a diagnosable condition. And I'm regularly surprised at the resistance people put up when you tell them they're more okay than they think they are.
That's interesting.
Right. Because they've come in, with this narrative.
Like a self-diagnosis.
And so,
and it's an narrative, and I would even use a different word. Our identity and our belief system gets very much attached to our illness if we're not careful. I can first and foremost think of myself as someone who is depressed. Or someone who is anxious, or someone who can't relate to people, and and I think that gets a little bit risky. And I think we'll talk about that with a little bit more in a minute with some other questions. But pros are good, but we do get a little bit tied to our mental health label, and we misuse those.
Yeah,
we misuse them.
And I think that's so interesting, just because thinking of how I grew up was maybe a little different than how y'all grew up with all of this language.
Well,
I'm sure it was.
There's a bit of an age gap.
Just a little one.
Yeah, it was
quite a bit.
But I see those things that you're talking about, like in people my age. I think it is a very normal conversation to be talking about, like, I'm going to go to counseling next week, and versus that being something you like hide away. And so I really love, even in our youth group, like our teens, that is something that they see as a tool that God's using, and seeing it as like a gifting that people are given, like counselors and therapists, and how God has uniquely gifted different people for different things, just like some people are gifted at leading worship and are gifted at teaching, that there's people that God has placed here on this earth that their gift is to give good advice and good counsel, and that's a very biblical principle that I think we see throughout, that you get to see whenever you go into counseling and start trying to get advice, even on the normal stuff, not even on just the crisis things, but just life in general. And so I've loved seeing that about my generation, I think, taking that, but I also see the other side of that of, I think, the words like depression, like I'm depressed and I have anxiety, all of those are normal words that probably shouldn't be normal words that we're using so often. And so I just think that's really interesting to hear that from a counselor perspective.
I'm glad the language is common. I think where we're getting our education about those terms and those words is problematic.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I really want to emphasize that point because I don't want you to be seen as an old grumpy man. I want you, because I want to make sure we hear that the trend now for those that are probably 40 and younger, it's hard to put an age on it. The trend of like seeing therapy as kind of a normal way of life, a kind of check-in. You said an oil change. That's a positive thing.
Sure.
That's a positive thing. And I think that's, I know for myself that's helpful for me because it's amazing how these stereotypes in your mind, begin
Oh,
to
man, yeah.
in the same way that someone would come in with an identity thing with a panic attack or I'm depressed, I'm or narcissist, whatever the terms you're using. In the same way, people my age have a stereotype of counseling is something only for when the house is burning down. I mean, a crisis. And so anyway, I just love to be able to put that out there. And I'll encourage people over 40, that it's okay to get a checkup, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah.
It's super helpful.
I think there's part of that, like, because it's under 42 that you'll find people like this, but there's just like a pride you've got to let go of to let somebody come in and help you with things that maybe you don't think you need help with until you sit with someone.
I do think I think there's a couple of things with that. I do think sometimes there is a pride issue. That's definitely a part of it. It's also hard to know who to go ask help from.
Yeah, that's good.
Like, how do I find the right person that's a good fit?
Something I've heard teens say before is, I can just vent to my friends, and why would I go pay someone to talk about the things I'm going through? And I just wonder what you would say to that. What's different about going to a counselor than just venting to my friends about something?
Yeah, and so I would say to that teen, it really depends on the intensity of thing that you're battling.
Yeah.
There is, I never want to be dismissive of the value of their friendships and the support that friendships provide. But I remember telling this to our own boys when they were younger. There's just no reason to expect another 15-year-old to have the wisdom and life experience that someone 45 or 50, for example, may have, and that those are different kinds of wisdom, and they're going to inherently give you different feedback. And what I would add to them is I wouldn't want them to have to pick a friend or a counselor. Let's utilize both.
Yeah,
and
that's
let's seek different kinds of wisdom from people with different life experiences and different trainings.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of transformation and getting into the actual specifics of therapy, you probably, there's no telling how many people you've seen over the years, and even being clinical director, you're probably aware of so many different cases. And so we thought it might be interesting to ask you, are there different characteristics of people that come to counseling and it seems like they get better? It seems like things improve. And then there may be some that come to counseling, either an individual or a couple, and it just like you get stuck in a rut and nothing really ever changes. And I know that's all pretty, situational and really based upon the individuals. But can you spot, or have you been able to spot some characteristics or trends of where counseling goes well or where counseling doesn't go well? Are there some factors involved with that?
Sure. So I think I have a two-part answer to
That's
this. So just generally speaking, it's I've got an ongoing list of questions I would love to ask God at some point.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And this one's on here, since I've been in this field, one of the things you see, you can take a child from a certain set of really terrible, abusive, yucky circumstances and take another child from a almost identical set of yucky, terrible, abusive circumstances, and one seems to have this level of resilience and ability to thrive and overcome with the right help around, and the other one gets the same level of help, and they just seem to be crippled for life, no matter how many resources you put in front of them. So I don't know that I can answer that comprehensively because it's a mystery to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I watch kids in both circumstances and adults in both circumstances try really hard and really want to be different. And some persevere and some just seem to be hamstrung forever.
Right.
But a couple of things. I do think once you're out of whatever yucky circumstance, hard circumstance you're in, there's a commonality with having good, solid, grounded people around you. That seems to matter. Whether they're therapists or not is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But people that are willing to speak some wisdom and some truth into your life seems to be a common factor. In the counseling world, what I see happen is I don't see much transformation, long-term lasting transformation happen, and until people start really diving into the beliefs they have about themselves.
Wow.
And so it's really easy to come to counseling and work on behaviors and have a place to talk about feelings, and those are necessary.
Yeah.
That's part of the process. But when change really happens is when I know that's been true for me also, when I have really identified and started to challenge the beliefs I had about myself that were not accurate, that were negative, that were critical, that told me I wasn't something or wasn't enough of something. That's when I could really sustain some behavior change and some contentment in life. And so I think that's the challenge for therapists, and I think for ministers, and for just being a good friend and a good family member, is when you can help people identify. Because typically the things I believe about myself starting out are not typically true. They are not typically positive.
Right.
In fact, they're hypercritical.
Right.
Yeah. And I've had experiences in my life just like that. And it just reminds me hearing that, like, what a gift it is that God designed us relationally, because I don't think without the people surrounding me in my life that I would ever be able to convince myself that those things aren't true.
Right.
And so being able to find that and have that both professionally and just from the people that love you, that are surrounding you, that are there to talk through those things, is huge. And so,
and if you're a research junkie, the research supports that too, that well-networked people tend to overcome whatever life challenges better than those that are not networked well.
Right.
That makes
As
sense.
a minister, the lesson points here are, if you think about the importance of community, like you said, the importance of that community, and if we bring it into being a part of the body of Christ, and that's the picture of the body of Christ, is to be encouragement, support.
That's good. Yeah.
Direct, reprove. I don't know that reprove. I'm not real thrilled about that one, but anyway, just talking about the importance of community, and also the importance of that identity.
Yeah,
that is absolutely crucial. And it is amazing. Like you said, you can talk about behaviors, but when it comes down to the beliefs about yourself, that to me, that's a very core concept of our mental health, but it's also a very core concept of being a follower of Christ.
Yeah, right.
Is that clear identity on who we really are.
Right.
I think I'm right. It's at least what I believe as of today. And I think it's close to correct. I think it's tempting when we struggle. I'm thinking from a spiritual perspective, not even a mental health perspective. We get really focused on the thing the person's doing that's destructive, and the thing needs some attention, whether that's substance abuse or anger outburst or whatever those things, sexual misconduct, whatever those things are. And I find it is really easy for me to look at the two of you and tell you how valuable you are and how God really sees you. But I would argue that is probably, if I could boil down our spiritual challenge for all of us, is to get just a snapshot and just a glimpse of how God really sees us. And I think if we can just get snapshots of that, about how he really views us and how he really sees us, then I think we're poised to do some transformation.
Yeah, that can change everything.
I don't think I change and then believe God sees me different. I think I start to believe God sees me different, and then I change. I think that really order is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a question for you, Jim. Have you ever been through counseling or seen a counselor?
Seems like a setup.
Not at all.
I know you a little bit, but I want to hear.
No,
that is.
And it's really interesting. Mark said just what he said, because I'm just going to affirm that.
Yeah.
About 10 years ago, I'll save you all the gory details.
Okay.
As much as I can. But I was, in Lincoln, Nebraska, senior pastor at a church that we had planted, and when you go through the eras of church life, believe it or not, there are times that are really difficult.
What?
And then there's times when things are rolling right along. But this was a very, very difficult time for a number of reasons. And I think I really experienced, I don't know if it was burnout and I'm really afraid to talk about my panic attack in front of Mark because it may not have been but there was a couple of times I was just like, really freak out mode and couldn't breathe and, all these kind of things. And I was kind of going, what is going on, because I was, of that generation that, well, I just need to suck it up. And so very fortunately, our church had a counselor on staff that the church was helping support. It wasn't like a full-time counselor that we were supporting. She had her practice, but we had an agreement with her. She's a good friend of mine. She came to my office, and I was kind of talking about, I think she sensed that I was a mess, and so she just asked me a question, she goes, how tell me about your Sunday afternoons. And that was the worst question to possibly ask me. I
see what you're doing.
I could have lied. I could have lied and said it was great, and I go home and have a great dinner. Lunch with my family, and la-di-da the rest of the day. But I was really honest with her about some of the struggles I had. And so, to make a long story longer,
okay.
I'll get to the end. The very thing Mark said is the very thing I needed to know. My identity was so wrapped up in that church, right? In other words, I saw my identity based upon my role rather than my relationship with God. And so so I went to see her for probably about 6-7 months, and maybe even longer than that. It's kind of hard to remember all that. But I saw her a couple times a month for quite a while. And it really was so helpful to me because, I was the one getting up talking about our identity in Christ. And I thought I had that really clear. But she was so helpful because she was very helpful in helping me see that what I was really doing is I was placing my identity in my role. In other words, as long as things were going well, I was okay with my identity in Christ.
Yeah.
But when things were starting rolling off the tracks, I was completely connected to that rather than what was really true. And man, that helped me so much. I got to a point where I realized I didn't care if it worked or not at the church. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just got to a point where I was like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay whether the thing rolls off in a ditch or whatever it does. And so I found that helpful. So when Mark, you were talking about that, I'm glad you asked me the question, but anyway, I was about to go, yes, because I think that is such a huge part of our mental health.
Yeah.
It goes back to, sometimes as Christians, we think our identity's clear, but I don't know if that's true for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Our identity's based upon some affiliations we have or, friends we have, but the core of who we are and how God sees us is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we always need those little reminders. Like, I think that's just such a testimony to how healthy it is, especially as leaders, to go and find people that are checking in on you and helping you see those things clearly. And not just leaders, but everybody, but especially when you are the one that's preaching those things, making sure there's somebody else that's still reminding you of that too is really a cool thing to hear from your story.
Exactly. Well, Mark, talk about transforming moments. Can you think of, I know it can be hard to think of specific examples, but is there some general examples of transforming things or transforming moments, not things? That's not what this podcast is called. Transforming moments that people have experienced. Probably a wide variety of different things that they come in to find help. And can you share maybe some good stories of transformation?
Sure, I'll share some general thoughts and just one I think semi-connected thought to something I should have said earlier. I know there is less of a taboo, but even in our Christian circles, I still hear this from time to time. Our first response when somebody's struggling with a mental health issue, a legitimate mental health struggle, depression, anxiety, whatever the case may be, sometimes our first response is to tell them to pray harder and just have more faith and just trust in God more. And I think that is a really dangerous thing to tell
Right.
somebody who may be making really ample efforts on all. They may really care about their
Yeah,
faith.
right.
They may already
Right.
be praying quite a bit. And I think we are trying to be supportive and encouraging with
Yeah.
those things, but it's but people who are struggling, especially with things like depression and anxiety, what they hear is, gosh, I'm already trying this hard and this is what I'm
Yeah,
getting.
and it's
And
still
I
not
am
enough.
just, my faith
Yeah.
is not enough. I am
Yeah.
doing this
Right.
church thing
Not
and this
enough.
spiritual thing wrong. And we end up reinforcing that belief and that identity that we're talking about. And so I would encourage, there's a time and a place to talk about faith, and there's a time and a place to talk about prayer more, but I encourage people not to lead with that
Yeah, that's good.
when they are faced with someone they love and they're trying to help when it's mental health related. I can think of specific stories. They're a little hard to tell because you have the whole confidentiality thing, and,
Right.
Exactly.
but I sometimes I wonder, do people think that do people really overcome depression?
Mhm.
Yes, they do. They can get to a place where they're, that narrative running in their head is really more about hope than it is about sadness and despair.
Yeah.
Without question, do marriages that come into your office, where there's been infidelity, for example, do they ever really get on track? Do they ever really get to a place where they can rebuild trust and have a marriage where the right kind of intimacy and connection that God intended can really happen? Yes, those things can happen. Do kids who are abused, do they ever get a place where they're functional and their life is not defined by the terrible things that happen to them? Absolutely. I think I see those things happen all the time. Now,
That's great.
there's this interesting trend in therapy. You don't often hear about it till well after the fact. What happens in therapy is people tend to get better. They quit coming to counseling because life feels better, and they
Yeah.
often don't tell the therapist why they're not coming anymore. They
I
just
hope they got better. Yeah.
and you find out later. You run into. That's
Yes.
one of the things I love about Midland. It's really not that large of a town, although the roads
Right.
feel very crowded. Is that you run into people later, or something else happens in their life, and they come back, and you realize that it's been an impact for them, and
Yeah.
they don't need to tell me they're better, but it sure is nice to hear that
if you
sometimes.
wanna
But
tell your
that was a
counselors,
long
thank
answer
you.
to say yes.
Yes.
I think there's some
Yeah.
doubt, especially more so with people who are probably above 40. There's still a question about, does therapy work? What do you really do in that office?
Yeah.
Is there do I just come in there and tell you my sad story? And what point? What
Yeah.
point is there to that? There's typically a little bit more than just coming in and telling.
Yeah.
In fact, if you're with your good therapist, just tip for everybody. If all they're doing is asking you to retell your sad story every time, you probably need to think about finding a different counselor.
That's good.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
It is
You,
good.
you have anything else?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, this has been so good.
Man, this has been
But I mean, I think
fantastic.
hearing just the things that people can overcome, like, leaves you with more faith and hope. And I hope that people who listen to this hear that going to counseling can be a step of faith, that is a step that you can take that is faithful to God and faithful to what He wants for you too, that it's actually a tool that's been given to us.
And I love the way you said that. When I was talking about, don't tell them this is a faith problem because
Yes.
you can't overcome. I would argue that it is a much larger step of faith
Yeah.
to go and be vulnerable with somebody
Right.
that you don't probably know at all, and to put your stuff and all the messes and all the mistakes on the table for somebody to look at and
Yeah.
respond to. I would argue that is a much larger
Yeah.
step of faith
Yeah.
than
And an act of love, like for the people around
Absolutely.
you in your life to go
Absolutely.
and get healthy for yourself so that you can be a better wife or mother and for
sure.
anyone else. So I just hope that this is something that's encouraging for people, that there's a tool, that there's access to that tool, that you can go and find that pretty simply, and that it can be a really good thing and transformative for your life and your health in lots of different ways.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thanks so much.
Yes. This
You're
was
welcome.
fun.
For being
Thanks for
our
asking me.
guest. And once again, I say this the last couple of podcasts, but good job, Jaden.
Good job, you.
And Jay, good job for Jaden and I. I mean, we did great to get you here.
yes, you did.
right.
Thank you.
I mean,
One of the best.
the best decision is the decision of who we get as our guests. And Mark, thank you so much. It's super helpful. I know for myself, and I'm sure
Yeah.
for all the people that listen and watch this,
Yes.
because when currently we're in the middle of Proverbs talking about choosing a life of wisdom, and the very basis and the very core of that is humility. And what you said about it's a very brave step to be vulnerable, and not just try harder. It's more about laying things open so you can be helped, so God can transform us based upon that. So thank you so much for being here, and this concludes another wonderful episode of our Transforming Moments podcast. And make every day a transforming day.
Boom. There we go.